Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. So this time we do have the first excerpt from the Dawn of Yangchen, the upcoming Yangchen novel. So July 19th is the release date, and we have a look at the prologue and part of the first chapter. The article from Gizmodo says a glimpse of the prologue and the first chapter. So it's hard to tell. I don't think it doesn't feel like it's like the full extent of everything, but so I'm guessing it's maybe the full prologue and a little bit of chapter 1, maybe. But we'll see how it goes. So I have read through it already, just so I have the context and can actually, like, you know, discuss it as we go through. So I'll sort of read it kind of more or less paragraph by paragraph, and we'll discuss what we can get out of this. So chapter is called Voices of the Past. Jetson paced down the hallway, trying to stay ahead of the screams. The high ceilings of the Western Air Temple tended to make echoes of whispers and explosions of dropped teacups. Though the girl was back in the infirmary being watched by the elders, her cries of pain sprang from every surface, bouncing off the hard stone. So I think straight away you get the idea that if you've read the description for the book, which is here, plagued by the voices of avatars before her for as long as she can remember, you'll connect it immediately to what's going on here, is that this is the prologue. So it's a young Yangchen crying in pain from what we are going to find out is basically these hauntings, or these almost like possessions by the past avatars. So that's what's actually happening here. Western Air Temple, this is, you know, the temple where she lives, so that makes sense. Jetson couldn't take it anymore and broke into a full run. Ignoring decorum, she sped past her sisters, ruffling robes, upsetting ink pots, prematurely ruining colourful sand paintings that were meant to be ruined only once they were finished. No one scolded her or gave her sharp looks in passing. They understood. So this is a thing that's been happening somewhat regularly, and Jetson, as we find out later, is actually quite close to Yangchen, so they understand why there's a bit of a panic and why Jetson specifically is the one doing this. When she ran out of the floor, she jumped. The upside down construction of the temple meant that despite its overall size, there was very little space to stand on. Nothing connecting the spires but thin air and a 3,000-foot drop. She didn't have her glider, eminently dangerous, but she could make the leap without it. Air at her back and air against her robes gave her enough loft to land on the next tower, the one containing the Great Library. Sering, chief caretaker of the books, waited in front of the tall shelves. The older woman's kind eyes were edged with worry. "I saw you coming. Is it happening again?" So, again, we find that out. Jetson nodded. Misos? I'm not sure about the pronunciation on a lot of these names. But so, this is the name of a person, but as we learn as we go on, they're kind of not really sure. They don't have the full context, because basically this is a person who a past avatar knew, and so they're trying to kind of connect the dots here and discover who this person is. So Sering blew out a breath, a silent whistle of frustration. That could be Misos, a famous scholar from the Ru Ming era. There's a Misos village in Hu Zin. It might have been named after a founder, or it could just be someone called Misos, in which case we're stuck. So Hu Zin, we find out about this. It's one of the provinces in the Earth Kingdom. It was said to be one of the ones that like a Zulon took over. We're obviously in the eras before that happened, but it's always interesting to get these sort of connective dots of like this random name dropped place. Here's actually some details about it from earlier eras. So they're trying to figure out who this is, what it refers to. Avatars tended to run in exalted circles, or they elevated the people around them to fame. It has to be the first one, the famous scholar. So this is the book straight away telling you that this person is Avatar adjacent. Another wail turned both of their heads. The child was suffering. "Help me and it'll go faster," Sering said. "Northwest corner, start with the poetry shells. Rue with the 3 drops of water radical." Not sure what that's about. They split up to search different sections of the ancient vault. Jetson ran her eyes over the labels and titles as fast as she could. Not every book fit on a shelf. Many of the tomes kept at the Western Temple were so old they were written on bamboo slips instead of paper. She passed rolled bales of text wider around than some of the pillars connecting the ceilings to the floors. 5 minutes later, she emerged from the library's depths, clutching a treatise on she didn't know exactly what. What mattered was the author's name. Sering met her by the door. I couldn't find any leads. You're holding our best shot. Thank you. Jetson sprinted back in the direction she came, the book tucked under her arm. Use your glider next time, Sering yelled. So they get the book that they think is the connection to, obviously, whatever Yangchen has been screaming and talking about through some past Avatar haunting connection. Jetson burst back into the infirmary. The huddle of elders parted to let her through. The girl's thrashing had settled into a dry, cavernous sobs. She pounded her fist on her pillow over and over. Not the involuntary shaking of a fever, but rather the deliberate motion born of a steady, all-consuming anguish that should have been beyond her 8 years. So obviously we find out here, Yangchen is 8 when this all takes place. So 8 years before she should find out she's the Avatar, you know, we find out later she effectively during these years realizes that she is the Avatar. We'll leave you two alone, Abbess Dagmola said. She and the rest of the nuns filed out. Too many people sometimes ruined the effect. Jetson opened the book to a random page and began to read. The level of risk can be determined by elevation, nearness to the source of water, vulnerability to rapid flows, and potential economic damage, she said. Confused, she briefly turned the volume to look at the cover, a discourse on floodplain management. Why in the world do we have this book? Jetson shook her head. It didn't matter. Understanding previous measures taken to mitigate the damage from flooding is essential, for they might compile danger instead of reducing it. The girl took a shuddering gasp of air and relaxed. Half a year, and that's as far as you've gotten, she said, smiling at no one. You have to stop taking on so many projects at once, Cece, or Say. So this is obviously the Yangchen speaking effectively as if she's a past Avatar to Jetson, who is reading out the book by Masseau's. So that's the dynamic going on here. It's a little bit confusing until you read through it a few times, but that's what's happening here. So highlighting that these two actually knew each other, a past Avatar and this character here. We later find out that this is Avatar. It's Avatar Gun, G-U-N, but I assume it's pronounced Goon or something like that. But we'll get to that in the coming paragraphs. So it worked. Thank the spirits, it worked. Jetson kept reading, plowing through the unfamiliar concepts mechanically. On the subject of silt deposits, the first time the child went through this, they had no clue as to what was happening. The healers did their best to cool her fever and keep her as comfortable as they could. As the incidents reoccurred, her babbling, incoherent at first, started to coalesce into sentences, names, slices of conversations. The words meant nothing to her caregivers until one day they heard her talking to His Majesty, the Earth King Zolai, a man she'd never met who died 3 centuries ago. So an Earth King from 300 years pre-Yangchen. It's kind of interesting. Thankfully, the abbess had thought to take notes. She'd written down every intelligible scrap, and in her scouring her pages, she pieced together a pattern. The names. Angelurk? I'm not sure about that one. Because obviously, like, I assume it's a water tribe name, and with the Q, and it's usually like Ak, but like Urk, Angelurk, I'm not sure about that one, and Yotogawa. Names from every nation, names of past Avatar companions. So that's quite interesting there. Not every phantom the child spoke to had made it into the annals of history. and some that had were never acknowledged as having close ties to an avatar. Jetson could only imagine the stories lost to time, filtering through the girl, merest fragments sticking in her throat. And the conversations were pleasant frequently enough. She would laugh with her friends in towns that had been renamed, provinces that no longer existed. Jetson had watched her leap from her bed and bellow at the success of legendary winter hunts, sit on the floor and meditate with someone else's inner peace. But occasionally she would have waking nightmares, bouts of sorrow and rage that threatened to tear her apart. She wouldn't mutter names, but scream them as if she'd been betrayed by the universe itself. So these hauntings, a lot of the time, are just random conversations with these people that the avatar knew. And so a lot of the time they're just kind of normal, casual, even meditation times. But obviously with that would come the bad times, and these are the terrifying moments, which is what's happening currently. She's obviously having to almost be like held down, and they have to desperately get this book to calm her down. So this is one of those terrible moments of anguish. By accident, they discovered she could sometimes be calmed by figuring out the past figure she was talking to when it was possible, and speaking back to her from that perspective. The deeper they could dive into the role, the better, like parents reading a bedtime story, doing the voices and parts. Familiarity was the best balm they had, and they acted their hearts out for her. The girl nodded off by the time Jetson reached a chapter on the proper construction of seawalls. Sering entered the room. No glider, Jetson noticed. She probably wanted to see if she could still make the jump too. How is she? The librarian asked. Better, Jetson said. Who was Masoz? A companion of Avatar Goon, Sering said, coming over to the bedside. Skilled poet and engineer who died in Han when Goon failed to hold back a tsunami. Jetson found a sour taste rising in her mouth. Failed. Not the choice of words she would have used for someone, avatar or not, bravely confronting a force of nature. Han still stood today as a port when it sounded like it could have been wiped off the map, along with everyone who'd lived there at the time. It's what's written. After Masoz drowned, Goon disappeared for a while before returning to duty. So, very interesting thing here of, like, obviously this is why Yangchen was in such a terrible state, is that it was this, basically, I suppose, remembering this incident where her as a past life was holding back a tsunami, but watching like people around her die, including Masoz here. It is also kind of interesting, the connection here of Masoz is like talking about like basically seawall construction stuff to, I suppose, like counter flooding and water based stuff, and then the sort of almost irony of this character drowning in a tsunami. But anyway, you were grieving. If the waters that Goon fought were the same ones that killed Masoz, then both the girl and the past life raging through her might have personally witnessed their friend take their last breath before plunging below the waves. They would have searched for a body in the wreckage, and worst of all, Jetson thought, they would have had to struggle with the terrible question of, what if I'd done things differently? What if? Perhaps Goon was the one who demanded the label of failure. It was simply unjust. To remember the events of a single life was painful enough. Reliving dozens of lives would be, well, it would be like getting caught by a tsunami, swept away by forces beyond your control. She's a smart kid, Jetson said. If she keeps having these visions, she'll figure out who she is long before she turns 16. Sering sighed. She reached out and stroked the sleeping girl's hair, now matted with sweat. Oh, little Yangchen, what are we going to do with you? So that's the prologue, I guess, or at least most of it, or whatever. It seems like a relatively decent length there for that. This is obviously the first chapter, the first step. At the age of 11, Yangchen had known who she was for a while on an intellectual level, and treated her avatarhood with a child's seriousness at the behest of her elders. This is a very important secret, all right, like Sering's custard recipe. Best not to talk about it until we figure a few more things out. The involuntary bouts of vivid memories still occurred. The ease with which past avatars slipped into Yangchen's speech troubled the leaders of the Western Temple. She would eavesdrop on their discussions about her, air spouting herself under windowsills, hiding behind pillars. You know, we keep asking the question, what do we do with her? She heard Jetson say one day, sharper than she usually was with her elders. The answer is, we'll prevent her from hitting her head on the ground, and when the memories are over, we'll carry on. That's what she needs from us, so that's what we'll give her. Nothing more, nothing less. As if Yangchen needed another reason to worship her older sister. Jetson wasn't related to her by blood, or maybe she was in a manner of fourth or fifth cousins, but it definitely didn't matter. The girl who cut up fruit in a stupid way, but at least gave you the symmetrical pieces, was your sister. The girl who showed you no mercy on the airball court and laughed in your face as she kept you scoreless was your sister. Jetson was either the person who would listen to Yangchen cry with utmost patience, or the one who'd upset her in the first place. So getting across the dynamic here, I'm assuming as the book goes on, we are going to find out that Jetson was either, I suppose, Yangchen's airbending teacher, or will be one of her companions initially. We'll get to some of this stuff in a second. So it made perfect sense that Jetson would guide her through her first attempt at meditating into the spirit world. A guide was an anchor as much as a pathfinder, a calling voice in the darkness. Don't have so many expectations, Jetson told a Yangchen buzzing with excitement. Not everyone has the ability to cross between realms. You won't be less or more of an avatar or an air nomad or a person if it doesn't happen. If you did it, I can do it. If you did it, I need to do it to become more like you. So that's interesting. The older nun rolled her eyes and flicked Yangchen on the forehead where her arrow point would eventually be. So again, we still have to keep up the canon of Yangchen and Ang, and then later Jinora are the youngest ones to get their tattoo. So 11-year-old Yangchen doesn't get it just yet. So I suppose we have to wait at least until she's like, what, 13? They went topside to the meadows above the cliffs of the Western Air Temple. There was no need to travel all the way to the Eastern Temple, the jumping off point for many spiritual journeys, where they could try closer to home first. Besides, Jetson scoffed, the extra sanctity of the Eastern Temple was more reputation and less proven truth. In the grass was a meditation circle, a stone slab laid level in the earth. 5 columns of rock jutted out around the circle, unevenly spaced. They looked like fingers and a thumb. The triple air nomad whirls at their tips, the prints. Yangchen knew about this place, but has always avoided it. It feels like a giant is about to grab me. Or let you go, Jetson said. A hand either opens or closes, but it can't do either of those twice in a row. Yangchen never knew how Jetson managed to be so blunt and cryptic at the same time. The two of them sat in the giant's palm, facing each other. They weren't alone. Abbess Dagmola and Librarian Sering had come along and relegated themselves to assistance, setting up incense, a wind horn. The abbess herself was going to ring the meditation bell. There was no hesitance by the two much older women in deferring to Jetson as guide. The session began. The smouldering incense was sharp and earthy, like tree resin. Yangchen could feel the overtones of the horn through her stone seat. She lost count of the bell strikes that both marked time and pointed out its meaninglessness. She suddenly saw a bright glow through her closed eyes, as if she'd been laboring under clouds the whole time. When she opened them, the light was intense but not blinding. Colors were brighter, as if the elements themselves had been ground in a mortar and then repainted on the backing of the world. Red flowers in the meadow glowed like embers. Green veins pulsed through canopying leaves the size of house roofs, and the sky was bluer than a cake of solid indigo dye. Yangchen had performed a feat of avatarhood. It had not happened to her involuntarily. It had not struck her down like thunder between her temples. It had not racked painfully through her limbs to damage the landscape. She'd done it. She'd done it. Her victory, and best of all, her favorite person in the world was right there beside her to share the moment. Huh, Jetson said, in one of her classic understatements. First try. That's quite good. Yangchen wanted to laugh and leap a mile into the air, but she would maintain a cool head, just like her guide. Maybe I only remembered how. Humility isn't more important than the truth. I think you pulled this off yourself. She thought her heart would burst. Over the hills of the spirit world, a pod of great winged whales, translucent and jelly-like, slowly floated through the sky. Nearby, a bouncing mushroom released a cloud of spores, which turned into twinkling fireflies. She was struck by a question. What do we do now? That's the beauty of it, Jetson said. We don't do anything. There is no use to the spirit world, and therein lies the great lesson. Here, you don't take. You don't anticipate or plan, you don't struggle, you don't worry about value gained or lost, you just exist like a spirit. That is interesting, because I've always wondered about like what's the whole like dynamic with spirits. And so to see at least an airbender who seems to be very, very spiritual, who's maybe been here a few times, just kind of make the point about them that while you're here, if you want to like be like the spirits, you just exist. That's what the spirits do. So there's no goal necessarily of like when you're in the spirit world to accomplish anything necessarily. So that's quite an interesting one. A pout of disappointment crossed Yang Chen's lips. Do we have to exist in this one spot only? Can we at least explore? Jensen grinned down at her. Yes, we can. Yang Chen took her sister's hand and decided there was a chance she might like being the Avatar. So that's where we end here. So I'm not sure if that's like the whole first chapter. Just because I'm assuming they're doing some sort of a thing where they're slowly time skipping through some key events in her life before we transition into what I'm guessing will be like 17, 18, maybe like 20-year-old Yang Chen for most of the book. Just because like obviously based on the description which we have here, she's doing like political business, so she has to be somewhat older to, you know, get into this whole dynamic. Very, very interesting. So the general direction of where I was thinking they were going with the whole haunted by past avatars thing is kind of more or less correct, in that like it did sort of predict the idea of like, yeah, what if she just like kind of had like a connection she almost couldn't stop to the past lives, and they kind of kept like inadvertently talking kind of through her. I wasn't sure about the exact way they'd go about it, so it's actually very cleverly written throughout this, that, you know, it obviously is a complicated situation and you wonder, why is this happening? It obviously speaks to her spiritual connection, that it's so like easy in a way that like there's no block here or anything like that, they just come through. Everything comes through, and because of that you get these moments where she effectively experiences some of the worst moments in certain avatars' lives, like the death of companions and so on, which is a very interesting concept to bring up and focus on, because we know one of the things that happens in Yang Chen's life is that some of her companions, her bending teachers and so on, die protecting her at some point. So she kind of experiences the same thing that she's actually experienced from past avatars. And I'm wondering if they're going to connect that whole thing of like what they've set up here, the fact that that event happens at some point in her life, with the whole idea that she's trying to, where is it? Yeah. To chart her course as a singularly powerful avatar, she must learn to rely on her own wisdom above all else. And I'm kind of wondering, is an aspect of this that she wants to be solo on this mission. She doesn't want other people with her in case something like that happens again. That if she can make herself as powerful as needs be, then she can prevent herself the pain of everything that she's experienced before. I wonder, will they play with that, and maybe meeting this character Kavik might kind of change that a little bit. So I'm wondering, might we see the kind of reformation of a team avatar for Yang Chen here, when she kind of initially didn't want one. And this is why I do maybe think that this character Jetson here, who's so important to Yang Chen, might they have her be someone who gets killed off to create a bit of a dynamic here. Like, obviously, would that be a little bit too similar to what they did with Kelsong in the first book for Kyoshi? Perhaps, but I think it depends on the way they do it, and if they that happened quite early in that book. If they wait until maybe like towards the like end to kind of reveal that as like, this explains a lot about the way Yang Chen is acting, that could be quite interesting, because I think at this point it feels like that has to come out here. There's a reason FCE put that in the Yang Chen book, sorry, that Yang Chen information in the Kyoshi books, and is now writing the Yang Chen books. I feel that connection definitely will be made. And then, as usual, some really nice little world building kind of tidbits throughout this that I quite like. A lot of names brought up here, some key mentions like who's in, the name of an era here, so that's quite good. There is an Earth King that gets mentioned as well. Where is that? Earth King Zolai from 300 years before Yang Chen. Some Avatar companions get mentioned here from different nations. And then Avatar Gun, of course, or Gun, whichever way you want to go with it. And a key event for him. So it's a kind of funny thing where like, oh, so now we actually know more about Avatar Gun than we know about like Avatar Salai. So are we going to learn more about Salai at some point? Maybe, perhaps. We'll see how this all goes. But I'm liking this so far. It's obviously the intro, and I think we are waiting to see how they go about doing the actual characterization of Yang Chen as she is for most of the book. But I kind of like this idea that we're maybe doing a little bit of a montage through here. Now, the question here is like this event here of her going into the spirit world. Is this meant to just kind of highlight that, okay, she has all this Avatar haunting stuff, but when she went to the spirit world for the first time, it highlighted that she could do Avatar things, that the way she's connected to the Avatars isn't like broken. It's just weird the way they're able to kind of come through very easily. Otherwise, everything else actually, you know, she learns very quickly. Or are they setting up that like we actually get to see some event that happens in the spirit world? I'm not really sure. But I wouldn't mind a little bit of a montage here, as like that's what the first chapter or two is about, and then we jump into things. The plot, obviously, like the actual details of the plot, as mentioned here, the whole Bin ruled by corrupt Shang merchants who've been resentful of the Earth King, and the whole weapon of mass destruction plot. Like, we're not really seeing much of that here directly, but I'm assuming we'll see stuff like, you know, I guess she knows stuff about Zito from either what was noted about her having these connections to past avatars, or being directly able to talk to him if she learns to control it later on. Because obviously, like, you kind of have to explain why it's maybe not a plot point in, say, the Rift. So I'm guessing that by the time we have her here in episode... Actually, wait, what did they say about this? She knew about this. They still occurred. Okay, so it still happens. They don't really get across the idea that they're like mitigated it, but they probably just know to have like lots of information on past Avatar companions around, so they can effortlessly deal with it. So it still feels like at some point they have to like find a way to fix that. So I'm wondering if they'll explain that as we go on. But so far so good. Definitely, I think, a little bit more interesting than, say, the excerpt they gave us for the Shadow of Kyoshi, which was just the initial sort of action chapter where we met some of the Dao Fei again. But here, because it's like the start of a new series of books, everything feels super new and unique and interesting. So really, really impressed so far. It makes me so excited to actually get into the book when it comes out. And we're not too far away. We're really not too far away. We're like, what, like 7-ish weeks or something like that away. Effectively like just under 2 months away from the release. So yeah, it's good. At this point, I don't think it will get a delay. So having the excerpt here relatively close to release is quite good. So that's all I really want to say here. I suppose I'll reflect on this over tonight into tomorrow and see if maybe I want to do another like speculation video based on what we learned from this. But right now I'm not really sure. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the excerpt for the Dawn of Yangchen. Otherwise, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.